She rejected every other offer until she met me. The twin sons of Lucerial rose in tandem over the city of Alaris, casting long copper shadows that glimmered off the crystalline towers. The air shimmered faintly with static from the atmospheric stabilizers humming above the city, an invention that kept the more temperamental weather patterns of this alien planet from hurling acidic hailstones at mid-afternoon weddings. Somewhere in the Grand Spire, nestled between the Spatial Diplomacy Bureau and the untranslatable Poetics Library, a woman was declining a marriage proposal. Your song was very full of notes, Yuria said with the grace of someone who'd been through this exact situation hundreds of times. Her voice carried the elegance of wind through obsidian leaves. She tilted her head, slightly long ears twitching in mild exasperation. The would-be suitor, a particularly optimistic member of the Miridac species, quadrupedal and fond of singing directly into the cortex of their beloveds, looked crestfallen. His frond sagged like overcooked pasta. I spent 17 lunar cycles composing it, he murmured. There was a modulation in the seventh verse meant to simulate the feeling of interstellar longing. You simulated indigestion, she said. Kindly, but a very passionate indigestion, he bowed in disappointment, his 6 knees cracking audibly as he exited a small drone whirred in from the upper ventilation shaft, its tiny voice announcing proposal number 373 logged. Rejection successful, emotional fallout probability 71%, engaging comfort. Beacon, a warm beam of artificial sunlight followed the Muridac down the corridor. Yuria sighed and waved a hand to deactivate the drone's melodramatic commentary. She rose from the proposal daze, stretched and cracked her neck. Her silver-veined skin caught the light, pulsing faintly with lavender hues that echoed her mood. Mild irritation with a side of boredom. Her long black hair, threaded with fine bioreactive filaments, coiled itself tighter behind her shoulders, sensing she might prefer a less regal silhouette today. Another day. Another hopeful suitor trying to impress her with songs, poems, or, in one memorably misguided case, a DNA fusion contract written on the back of a napkin. What they all failed to grasp was that Aloya wasn't interested in being won like a diplomatic treaty or admired like a rare sculpture. She was already the heir to the Larry Council, a decorated strategist from the Zarnath Wars, and someone who once held off a pirate fleet with only a malfunctioning translator and a glare that translated well enough. She didn't need more gifts or declarations of love. What she needed, perhaps more than she admitted, was someone who could make her forget her role long enough to laugh. The inner wall of her suite shimmered with an incoming priority message. She rolled her eyes. Probably another emergency involving the Kolari ambassador, who had a tendency to transform into a puddle gelatin when stressed. She waved her hand and the projection flickered to life. Ambassador Yuria, said the official voice, please be advised a new cultural liaison from Earth has arrived and will require orientation. His name is Trevor Wilkes. Clearance level moderate, experience level low to negligible. Diplomatic incident probability currently climbing. She blinked. Earth. Again, humans were endlessly enthusiastic and endearingly short-lived, which made them more like excitable space hamsters than reliable allies. Still, they occasionally surprised her with inventions like breakfast cereal and sarcasm, 2 things Lycerial had managed to live without for centuries but now found mildly addictive. With a resigned flick of her wrist, she sent a command to the hallway, summon the human. If he caused a disaster, she would simply assign him to the Planetary Archive Division, where overconfident interns went to catalog dust for a living. Trevor Wilkes entered the Grand Spire 5 minutes late, wearing a crumpled blazer, a poorly translated welcome pin in Lasari script. That red eye contained loyalty spores and the witty expression of someone who was simultaneously awed and deeply confused. He was greeted by a Lysari functionary whose face remained expressionless even as Trevor offered a handshake, realized. Halfway through that Laurie greetings involved toe-tapping and tried to correct. Mid-motion, what resulted was something between a dance and a diplomatic seizure. Orientation briefing, the functionary said with the deadpan tone of someone who had long ago lost hope in. Interspecies Harmony Room 17Z. Trevor shuffled in, clutching a tablet of reference notes he hadn't actually read. He'd skimmed something about Lissari courtship involving a fusion of soul tone frequencies and shared dreamscapes, which sounded both romantic and incredibly stressful. He was here to observe, translate, and hopefully not offend anyone with the wrong use of affectionate sneeze or combat winking. Two phrases which, to his horror, existed when the orientation door slid open. He saw her, Yuria, not just another dignitary, not just another alien. She was striking. Not just in that otherworldly beauty sense, though that was certainly there. Tall, elegant, silver-veined skin that shimmered with her every breath, but it was her eyes, sharp, curious, like they had already sized him up and found something amusing. Human, she said. He swallowed hard. Yes, last I checked you're late. Fashionably, he offered, or possibly just confused about your planetary time system. You use dual sun calibration, right? So technically I'm early in the right solar frame. She arched a brow. You spilled soup on your chest. He looked down. A blotch of bluish fluid stained his shirt. Diplomatic gift from the Thorn Ambassador, he said. It was traditional. I think I drank a sentient life form. Her lips twitched. The room's temperature adjusted slightly, subtly responding to her mood. The walls around them were embedded with mood-reactive alloys, something Trevor had read about but never seen in person. The walls shimmered faintly violet. Amused. You're different, she said finally. Trevor scratched the back of his neck. Thanks, I try, mostly unintentionally. Most people introduce themselves by listing credentials or genetic compatibility scores, right? Well, I have a tortoise named Jeff. He once bit a drone. A pause, then she smiled. It was not the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd won something. It was the kind of smile that made you realize the game was far more complicated than you'd imagined, and that somehow you just moved your first piece. Yua turned and walked toward the observation deck, long coat trailing behind her like stardust. Well then, Trevor Wilkes, she said over her shoulder, let's see if you can survive orientation without accidentally proposing marriage. He followed, grinning despite himself. Not unless the soup asks first, he muttered, and so began a story that would confuse star charts, annoy bureaucrats, and make even the mind prism itself raise metaphorical eyebrow. The Lysari sky shifted colors with deliberate elegance, like it knew it was being watched. Amber to rose to deep amethyst, always pulsing gently behind the translucent domes of the city's curved architecture, mirrored the natural formations of its native landscape, smooth coral-like protrusions rising into towers covered in fractal veins of bioluminescent vines that adjusted hue depending on the hour, the weather, and the collective mood of the populace. At night, the city didn't sleep. It hummed in slow song. Trevor Wilkes was not humming. He was hiding, technically crouching behind a decorative spiral of kinetic stone which emitted the gentle sound of rainfall every 4 seconds. It was meant to calm guests at the moment. It was doing the hard job of masking Trevor's half-panicked breathing. Okay, he whispered to himself, you didn't offend anyone. You didn't call anyone a gelatinous overlord by mistake. You just laughed a little too hard when that floating ambassador burped mid-sentence. That's not illegal. He peeked around the corner and spotted Yuria several meters away, deep in conversation with a counselor whose head appeared to be a cluster of rotating prisms. She was composed, poised, her voice like warm glass under pressure. He couldn't hear her, but he could read her posture, the slight angle of her ear tips, the way her fingers flex subtly when bored. He was starting to recognize her tells. It was both fascinating and mildly terrifying. Trevor had spent the last 3 days shadowing her, not in a creepy stalkerish way he hoped, but as part of his official role, cultural liaison, human presence. The guy who was supposed to absorb Lysari etiquette and not accidentally start an interplanetary war by sneezing wrong. So far he'd been incredibly average at it. Day 1 he tried to bow to a chair. Turned out to be a dormant life form. Day 2 he'd complimented a diplomat's outfit, unaware that Lysari culture considered discussing clothing a form of mild flirtation. That was a conversation he barely escaped with dignity intact. Now here in day 3, crouching like a lost tourist at an alien bus stop, he was trying to gather himself before another cultural exchange moment made it into the official logs. Are you attempting to merge with the art installation? Uria's voice floated toward him. He flinched, stood too fast, banged his shoulder against the kinetic stone, and emitted a sound not unlike a startled llama. She approached, eyebrow raised, amusement curling at the corners of her lips. No, he stammered. I was just absorbing the ambience. The ambience. She echoed, unimpressed. The rain noise, very meditative. It is a replica of our seasonal morning weather, she said, deadpan, associated with the grieving process. Oh, he said, rubbing his shoulder. Then I am extremely in touch with my emotions right now. She laughed, not a full laugh, but a real one, short, surprised, the kind that felt like an accident. The sound was like water touching hot metal, quick, unexpected, and a little dangerous. I see. You've survived 3 days without being deported, she said, turning to walk, expecting him to follow. He did. I consider that a personal record. As they strolled through the elevated corridors of the spire, translucent floor panels showed the gardens below, shimmering with anti-gravity flora, some of which waved lazily at them. One bulbous plant with a particularly judgmental face glared at Trevor. He waved awkwardly. It hissed, so he ventured. How does one get to be the most proposal-rejected person in the quadrant? She glanced at him sideways. By being unreasonably attractive and aggressively uninterested. That's refreshingly honest. I've been proposed to with gemstone necklaces, rare moons, genetic compatibility charts, and once a song written in the language of whales, actual earth whales, someone thought that was charming. I once wrote a girl a haiku in high school, Trevor offered. She responded with a restraining order. I get it. She smiled again, this one longer. The corridor opened into the hall of interworld tensions, a vast gallery filled with floating orbs displaying past diplomatic conflicts. One of them was replaying a loop of 2 insect diplomats fighting over desert rights during a peace summit. Uria stopped before a particularly large orb glowing in warning red. This is the Virex incident, she said. 2 years ago, an env from a rival Lysari house attempted to genetically override a peace protocol. Nearly triggered a planetary lockdown. Trevor studied her face. It was neutral, composed, but her fingers were clenched slightly behind her back. He didn't ask more. Not yet. You seem lonely, he said, instead regretting it instantly. She looked at him with a kind of measured silence that could peel paint off a ship's hull. Is that your professional observation, Mr. Wilkes? No, he said quickly. Personal, definitely. Unprofessional. Her gaze didn't waver. Then good. I prefer personal. He blinked. You do. I'm surrounded by people performing their roles. I find those who stumble interesting, he snorted. I'm basically a professional stumbler indeed. They paused at the end of the hall, overlooking the city. The twin suns had begun to set, casting long beams of golden violet through the dome below. The city's light patterns began their nightly dance, each neighborhood glowing with its own signature frequency, a sort of luminous fingerprint. Tell me, she said quietly, what do humans believe about soul bonding? He scratched his head. We're more into dating apps and arguing over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Pineapple, earth, fruit, sweet, spiky, controversial. She nodded solemnly. Perhaps it is a test of character. He grinned. You have no idea. As silence Settled between them, something shifted, small, imperceptible, like the click of a key turning in an ancient lock. She didn't dismiss him, she didn't turn away. She simply stood beside him, long ears catching the last light of day as the city below began to pulse with dreams. And for once, Trevor didn't feel like a mistake in motion. He felt like maybe somehow he'd found the one person in the galaxy who saw through his awkward jokes, his ill-fitting jacket, his misplaced charm, and hadn't sent him to a distant moon in a diplomatic crate, not yet. Anyway, by the fourth morning of his diplomatic tenure, Trevor Wilkes had managed to break a tea synthesizer, get ejected from a hover bath, and unintentionally insult the reproductive rituals of a tentacled diplomat from the Glen system by complimenting his hat. The hat, it turned out, was not a hat, it was a spouse. So when Trevor arrived at the spire with only minor burns and his clothing mostly intact, he considered the day already a glowing success. Ilaria, on the other hand, was watching three diplomats from the Yalith coalition argue over the interpretation of a poetic trade agreement. The hologram of said agreement floated mid-air, letters rearranging themselves with irritating elegance every time someone disagreed. A floating translation orb emitted frustrated beeps. I failed to see how the wind that sings between us could refer to import taxes. The Yalith representative complained, his voice like static through velvet. Uria didn't sigh, but her ears twitched in a way Trevor now recognized as the Lissery equivalent. It is a metaphor, she said, evenly symbolic of mutual exchange and openness. The wind doesn't pay customs, the other delegates snapped. Trevor leaned in and whispered, want me to throw myself into the dispute and claim Earth recognizes wind as a taxable entity only if you want to start an interstellar lawsuit. I've always wanted to be legally declared a weather system. Her lips curved slightly and she flicked her fingers to dismiss the hologram. Let's take a break before someone accuses the moon of evading tariffs. They stepped out onto the high balconade, a suspended bridge of bioreactive glass that curved like a ribbon between two towers below. The city pulsed in soft green and violet hues, its light syncing with the gravitational rhythm of the planet A. Zephyr passed them, engineered to be just the right temperature and scented faintly like something between cinnamon and charged plasma. You seem different today, Illyria said, glancing sideways. I took your advice. I don't recall giving any. You frowned when I brought up sleep deprivation and sarcastic breakfast choices. I took that as a warning, and you slept. I passed out in a diplomatic storage locker. Apparently it's where they keep ceremonial headwear and complimentary fruit snacks. I made a nest. Her laugh was soft, genuine. You're incurable. I try not to be, but Earth sarcasm is encoded in our DNA. I blame cartoons. They walked in silence for a moment, watching a small flock of floating life forms drift by. They looked like jellyfish with propellers humming faint musical notes as they passed. One attempted to harmonize with Uriah's breath but was promptly ignored. You know, she said finally, most who come here spend the first week trying to impress me. Trevor raised an eyebrow. And I'm just impressively unimpressive. You are not trying to win me, that is rare. Well, I've seen what your suitors look like. There was that guy with the crystalline spine and the sentient poem tattooed across his chest. He wept when I corrected his grammar. Trevor snorted. Yeah, see, I can't compete with that. Best I've got is a mediocre pancake recipe and a highly specific knowledge of old Earth sitcoms. Then you may be the first honest man I've met in decades. He opened his mouth to make a joke but paused. Her expression was still not guarded, just still. Decades, he repeated. You don't age the same way, do you? Number Lasari lifespans average for Earth centuries. I'm considered young, barely past 100. Trevor looked out across the city. So I'm basically an overripe peach in comparison. Not overripe, just fast ripening. Well, that's better. The sound of approaching footfalls interrupted the Moment a Lasari aide visibly flustered approached with a blinking message. Tablet Uria, the aide said there's been an unauthorized transmission intercepted. Near the northern satellites someone's broadcasting direct proposals again. She took the tablet and scanned it. Let me guess, House Zyrath, actually it's a human. Trevor blinked. Wait, another human? Uria's expression darkened slightly. Which on? Her still looked like a serene cloud considering raining on someone specific. The aide continued, he's been broadcasting personal messages, heavily poetic, something about merging fates, celestial love, and a dance of molecules. That's awfully dramatic, Trevor said. He included a sonnet written entirely in binary. That's extremely dramatic. She handed back the tablet. Blocked the transmission. File a report with Earth's Intercultural Affairs if they insist on sending romantics through the worm gate at least. Vet them for sanity. Yes, ma'am. As the aide left, Trevor chuckled. Is it always like this? Unfortunately, some believe if they can bypass diplomacy and reach me directly, they will sway me, and you've never said yes, never, not even out of curiosity. She turned to him, ears catching the light like curved glass. Curiosity is dangerous. It opens doors. Doors are good. Some lead to rooms with no exit. Trevor leaned on the railing. Well, if you ever want a door with snacks, cartoons, and extremely mediocre Earth jokes, I'm your guy. You persist, I adapt. It's a human thing. We fall down, spill soup, flirt badly, and keep showing up. Anyway, her gaze lingered on him. Something shifted in it, less analytical, more present. There's a council event tomorrow, she said suddenly. A diplomatic dinner. I require a companion. Trevor's eyebrows rose. You're asking me? You've already insulted a dozen species. I doubt the damage could worsen. That's the nicest backhanded invitation I've ever received. Do you own formal attire? Define formal. No, I could improvise, maybe borrow a cloak or a large houseplant. She smirked. Be ready at 7th bell, and don't bring any edible gifts. I make no promises. She walked away, long coat trailing her, ears flicking slightly in amusement. Trevor watched her go, half wondering how he had gone from walking disaster to potential dinner guest. The sky above shifted again from amethyst to midnight blue, pierced by the twin moons. The city's lights danced below, and somewhere in the depths of the spire, a jellyfish-like creature attempted to hum the Earth national anthem. Trevor smiled. This was going to get weird, very, very weird. The diplomatic dinner was not as Trevor had initially assumed. A dinner was more like an opera performed in zero gravity combined with a political summit and a mildly dangerous chemistry experiment. For one, there were no chairs, just gently oscillating cushions of compressed air that required a graceful hover entry, a term Trevor quickly learned meant try not to fall face first into the ambassador from Dale Prime. He'd worn the formal ensemble provided by the Spire's diplomatic ward, which he suspected was either fashion-forward or punishment. The fabric shimmered like oil on water and changed colors based on his emotional output. It had turned a violent chartreuse when he saw Uria. She had arrived in a gown that looked like it had been stitched from the night sky itself. It moved when she did, rippling with stardust that pulsed faintly in time with her breath, her long ears adorned with delicate chains of magnetic crystals flicked toward him the moment she approached. You're green, she said. Amused, I'm feeling vaguely nauseous with a touch of awe. That shade means embarrassment. Well, good, it's accurate. She leaned in, examining his collar. At least the translator threads are active. Try not to insult anyone with a greeting this time. One tentacle shake and I'm ruined forever. She offered her arm. He took it, and together they floated more or less into the main hall, a dome of translucent layers that reflected starlight into cascading ribbons overhead. Dozens of species milled about, many defying basic Earth physics. A group of gaseous beings hovered above a mist pool, communicating via bursts of scented vapor. A crystalline entity, Klinkhet, when it walked the dessert table, shimmered Multiple dimensions. I feel like I wandered into an intergalactic prom. Trevor whispered. You haven't seen the toast yet. The Yarians vaporize a ceremonial bread. Of course they do. As they made their way through the throng of delegates and floating food platforms, several guests nodded respectfully to Aliyah. A few raised their appendages, tendrils, or glistening itocs. Greeting. Trevor returned each with a charming nod that he hoped didn't translate to "I challenge your uncle to a duel." One delegate from the Zero cluster approached them with a curious glint in his translucent mandibles. "Alia, you are glowing as ever." "It is the gown," she replied coolly. "And who is this?" "Oh, a human. Delightful. We haven't had one survive a diplomatic dinner since the cutlery incident of 2219. Trevor smiled. "I promise to keep all utensils in the intended orifices." The Zero laughed. It sounded like two glass bottles being gently shattered. "He has humor." "I approve." A guided Trevor away before any glacier could be endangered. "You're doing surprisingly well." I think my color just shifted to nervous optimism as the crowd gathered for the ceremonial announcement. The center of the dome opened to reveal the matriarch of the council. Her body appeared to be composed of tightly coiled light, constantly reassembling, never fully solid. She floated above a crystal plinth and radiated peace, wisdom, and the unsettling feeling of being watched by a billion tiny eyes. "Welcome." The matriarch intoned, her voice reverberating directly inside their skulls. "Let us speak, share, and remember. Let our galaxies meet in harmony and with excellent finger foods." Trevor blinked. Did she say finger foods? They added that for the humans I feel represented during the post-announcement mingling. Trevor attempted to converse with a feline-like being from the Sierra system who was deeply concerned about the ethical treatment of data clusters. Meanwhile, Yuria was cornered by a young Lari noble, tall, silver-skinned, with ears nearly as long as hers and a voice that sounded like poetry. "Losing patience, Lady Alla," the noble purred. "Your presence turns his counsel into art." Trevor overheard. His gown flickered from orange jealousy to puce attempted stoicism. He edged closer. "I wasn't aware art could insult time space mechanics." Yuria replied. "I meant it as praise. You phrased it like a hyperbole." Sneezed on a dictionary. Trevor couldn't help but grin. The noble turned, eyeing him. "And this a human, your companion? He is a guest of the council." "Ah," the noble said. "How quaint." "Quaint," Trevor said, "is how we describe small dogs in sweaters. I prefer unexpectedly durable." The noble blinked slowly. "You have bravado and a moderate understanding of which fork not to use on a dignitary." Yuria's mouth twitched. "We were just leaving." They drifted away as the noble turned his attention to someone more susceptible to sonnets. Trevor leaned toward her. "That guy thinks he's a cosmic Casanova. He writes love poems in bloodstone ink. Yikes, does that wash out? Not from clothing or the soul." Trevor chuckled. "So what do you usually do after these galactic dinners?" "Quiet contemplation. Assassinate suitors." She considered. "Sometimes I return to the gardens, or I visit the archives and watch old transmissions of ancient Earth media." His eyes lit up like movies sitcoms. "Actually, I am fond of laughter." Trevor almost gasped. "Name one." "Frasier." He blinked. "You're telling me out of all Earth's legacy content you got hooked on a neurotic radio psychiatrist with a taste for sherry?" Yuria raised a dignified brow. "Niles is underrated." He clutched his chest dramatically. "You continue to astound me." The night wound on, and as the crowd began to disperse into smaller cliques of whispered debates and floating dance displays, Yuria and Trevor drifted toward one of the outer terraces. From here the stars looked impossibly close, as if they could reach out and stir them with a spoon. The air was tinged with ozone and the scent of a lissari flower that bloomed only under shared moons. "I think I survived," Trevor murmured. "You did more than that," Yuria replied. "You navigated complexities with humor and grace and zero diplomatic incidents." Mostly, they stood in companionable silence, and for a moment all the layers of protocol and expectation melted away. It was just him and her and the stars. Closer than he'd ever felt to anyone. Then she said, "You're glowing blue." He looked down. "What's that one?" Calm, he exhaled. "I'll take it." Trevor awoke the next morning with a vague sense of pride, a mild headache, and the deeply unsettling feeling that he might have agreed to co-chair an interstellar ethics committee. During dessert, he padded barefoot across his quarters, which obligingly adjusted the floor texture to warm moss, and called out to the room's AI assistant, "Did I prom anything last night that could result in legal or romantic entanglement?" "Reviewing event logs," said the AI in a soothing voice that sounded suspiciously like his high school chemistry teacher. "You accepted an honorary membership with the Florian Culinary Guild, declined 6 business propositions, and agreed to judge a galactic pastry competition next week." Trevor blinked. "Pastry? Interplanetary tarts, sir. Well, I've trained my whole life for this moment." He dressed quickly, or as quickly as one could when the formal wear included levitating cuff links and a tie that required a minor psionic adjustment to align with his mood. The mood was cautiously optimistic with undertones of caffeine dependency. He checked the message console. One unread file encrypted, sent by. He opened it. It was an invitation to join her in the East Wing Conservatory. The time was vague, the location less so. The conservatory was unlike anything on Earth. It wasn't made of glass and ferns. It was a semi-organic structure grown from synthetically engineered seed walls that expanded into branching domes of translucent petals. Inside, gravity was slightly reduced, and plants whispered when they moved. Bioluminescent foliage coiled across the air like slow smoke. Some of the flowers hummed, others blinked. A few politely averted their leaves as he passed. Uria stood in the center beneath a flowering tree that pulsed with soft ultraviolet light. She wasn't in her formal attire this time, just a flowing garment that shimmered faintly when she moved like moonlight caught in water. Her long ears twitched in greeting. "You came." Wasn't going to risk insulting an intergalactic florist. "Technically, this place is curated by the Order of Living Symphonies." "Of course it is, and I suppose these flowers compose sonnets only when they're fertilized with meteor dust." Trevor stepped closer, tilting his head to listen. The tree made a sound like a cello tuning itself. "You wanted to talk?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Not about treaties or suitors or the pastry crisis of Glen Sector 8. Too bad I brought my own icing theory." She didn't smile, but her ears twitched with amusement. "I wanted to speak about you." "About us?" Trevor froze, and not because a tiny floating seed had just attempted to sit in his ear canal. "You're different," she said, "and I don't mean only because you're human. You don't wear masks like the others. You laugh when you're nervous. You try even when you're clearly outmatched." "Outmatched is my default setting. You don't see me as a symbol or a prize. You see me well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I mean, sure, you're also terrifyingly intelligent and have ears that could pick up jazz frequencies from space, but yeah, I see you." She turned toward the tree, touching one of its glowing branches. "Do you know why I reject them all?" Trevor shook his head. "Because love to my people is a contract. It is bound in oath, in logic, in strategic alignment, but I want something else. I want confusion, mess, emotion, the way you humans throw yourselves into the unknown just to feel something real." He laughed softly. "Well, we are experts in that usually, while tripping over our own feet. I once read a human novel. The characters fell in love not because it was rational, but because they made each other laugh during an apocalypse." "Ah yes, that's chapter 1 in our romantic handbook." She faced him now, closer than before. "Would you ever consider staying?" Trevor blinked. "On Lara, on this path with me." 1,000 jokes rushed to his tongue, all of them inappropriate, so he swallowed them, looked her in the eyes, and said the most honest thing he could muster. "Yes, yes, I would." Her gaze searched his, and for a Moment nothing else existed, no galaxies, no treaties, no awkward diplomatic dinners, just her, just him, and then of course a vine wrapped itself around his ankle and lifted him gently into the air. Uriah stifled a laugh as he dangled upside down. It's a gesture of affection from the moonspore bloom, it likes you. Great, tell it my blood pressure doesn't. She waved a hand and the vine released him, depositing him back on the ground. With surprising gentleness, he brushed himself off, dignity wobbling somewhere near his elbow. I can't take you anywhere, she said. Correction, you can take me everywhere. I'm just guaranteed to cause at least one awkward scene. That may be exactly what I need. They walked together through the conservatory as the flora sang quietly around them. She told him about her childhood on the orbital farms, about how she had trained in 12 disciplines before diplomacy. He told her about his brief and disastrous attempt at learning the violin and his uncanny ability to guess which vending machine snack would jam first. As they walked, something unspoken formed between them. Not a declaration, not a contract, just a thread, fragile, new, real. By the time they reached the outer archway, the sky was shifting into its violet phase and the moons were peeking through the atmosphere like curious children. Trevor paused, looking up. Do you think it's possible, he asked, for two people from different stars, different cultures, with entirely incompatible breakfast habits to actually make it work? Tilted her head. You mean, can love survive gravity, politics, and interspecies pastry judgments? Exactly, she smiled, and this time it reached every part of her. If anyone is foolish enough to try, it would be us. And above them the stars blinked in agreement. Trevor never expected his interstellar romance to involve quite so much paperwork. 2 days after the moonlit walk through the conservatory, still replaying in his brain like a favorite song on loop, he found himself in the Spire's Bureau of Intercultural Alliances, knee-deep in forms that require genetic signatures, subquantum verifications, and one clause he swore was just a riddle. The Lasari, it seemed, took cross-species courtship very seriously, especially when the Lasari in question was a prominent diplomat with ears that occasionally twitched like antennae under emotional duress. Are you certain this one isn't asking for my reproductive forecast? Trevor muttered, squinting at a holographic glyph that resembled a flamingo doing yoga. The liaison, a being made entirely of softly rippling prisms, chimed musically. Form IC 499 certifies your awareness that romantic entanglement with a Lysari of Uriah's status may result in diplomatic inquiry, potential royal observation, and viral media coverage across no fewer than 8 systems. Oh good, Trevor said. Nothing says romantic intimacy like royal observation. The prism being warbled encouragingly. Many find it quite flattering. I think we define flattering differently. Once he survived the bureaucratic gauntlet and only signed one document in raspberry jam by accident, Trevor was free to wander the public levels of the Spire again. Word had begun to spread. He could feel it in the way the station's denizens watched him, curious, amused, occasionally pitying. Rumors moved fast when they traveled through telepathic species. One alien winked at him with a third eye and whispered, brave little mammal, before vanishing into a gravity shaft. Trevor's next destination was Allura's private chamber, not in a romantic sense at least. Not yet, but rather because she'd asked to show him something she called her memory field. He wasn't entirely sure whether that meant a literal field, a data construct, or a metaphorical mental landscape filled with regrets and emotionally symbolic goats. Turned out it was a bit of all three. Allura's room was like nothing he'd ever seen, a rounded dome embedded with neural responsive panels. It bloomed open as they entered, responding to her thoughts and moods. Images hovered midair, glimpses of her past flickering like dream fragments. A silver-skied farm, a city where buildings folded into themselves like origami, a scene of her younger leaping into a low-gravity ocean and laughing underwater. It's beautiful, Trevor said, reaching toward one projection that showed her playing some kind of flute plant hybrid under twin moons. She watched him quietly. Most see only the polished version of me, the diplomat, the untouchable, the Lissari enigma, and now I get the deleted scenes. A rare smile curved her lips. Exactly, he stepped through the shifting memories, immersed in them. Some were joyful, others pained. In one she stood before a tribunal, her expression unreadable as a panel of elders deliberated. Another showed her walking alone through a corridor of statues, each a previous ambassador carved in solemn stillness. You're not just carrying your own expectations, Trevor said quietly, you're carrying theirs. Yuria nodded. Every proposal I've received came with a motive, an alliance, a legacy. You're the first who offered nothing but yourself. Well, to be fair, myself includes some pretty questionable dance moves and a total lack of knowledge about interstellar utensil etiquette, yet somehow I find that preferable. There was a pause, heavy and humming with possibility. Then she added, also, I like the way you say things that shouldn't be funny but are. Trevor grinned. It's a human specialty. We call it being inappropriate in emotionally vulnerable moments. They stood in the memory field a while longer, letting it flicker around them like fireflies from different timelines, and then with no fanfare, no dramatic swell of music, Yuria reached for his hand. Her touch was cool, delicate, but firm. Grounded. You once said, she began softly, that you'd stay, that you would walk this path with me. He nodded. Still true. It won't be easy. Romantic things never are. Except chocolate. Chocolate is very easy. You will be scrutinized, judged already. Happening. I was called brave little mammal by someone with 6 tongues. She laughed, a short, sharp, clear sound that felt like it belonged to someone finally breathing after a long time underwater. I wanna try, she said, not as a symbol, not as a Lissari, just as me. He took her other hand. Then let's make history the weirdest way possible together. Just as he leaned forward, their moment was spectacularly interrupted by a shrill siren echoing through the chamber walls. The memory field snapped off like a light doused in panic. Yuria's ears stiffened. Emergency protocol Alpha 9. Trevor blinked. That sounds severe. A voice buzzed through the room. Security breach in Sub-X 7, unidentified life form detected. All personnel report to containment sectors. Yuria released his hands and turned toward a hidden console, her diplomatic poise returning with frightening speed. Trevor, she said sharply, stay here. Are you kidding? If you think I'm missing a potential space monster crisis, you clearly haven't read enough of my Earth stories. She didn't argue, just gave him a look that said, don't get eaten, then activated a portal door embedded in the far wall. They emerged into chaos. The corridor lights were pulsing red, and station personnel were scrambling to reroute power from nearby sectors. A flickering hollow screen showed a shifting form, something large, indistinct, glitching the sensors with each movement. It was trapped barely within a shifting field of quantum stasis rings. For now, unauthorized dimensional breach. One technician muttered, whatever it is, it wasn't supposed to exist in our timeline. Trevor squinted. You're telling me this is a temporal anomaly or a misplaced pet from a collapsed multiverse? The text said grimly. Ala turned to Trevor. Still wanna stay? He looked at the writhing blur of cosmic nonsense on the screen, then back at her more than ever, and so hand in hand they faced the thing that wasn't supposed to be, and did what all the best humans and Lysari do in times of crisis. They made it up as they went. Trevor hadn't expected the final leg of his space-faring romantic odyssey to involve being mildly electrocuted by a transdimensional cephalopod with an attitude problem, but by now he'd learned to stop expecting anything at all. The creature, eventually dubbed Florius by the station's PR team, was now safely contained, pacified by a combination of Reverse time resonance soothing classical music, it inexplicably adored 18th century earth harpsichord and a calming pheromone mist designed by 3 chemists and 1 enthusiastic pastry chef. No one could explain exactly what Florius was, only that it seemed mildly offended by conventional physics and liked to rearrange furniture into complex spiral patterns. When left unattended, Trevor had been grazed by one of its memory-siphoning tentacles during the containment breach, which meant he spent 2 full days unsure of his own name and convinced he was a galactic librarian named Bixby. Thankfully, Uriah had stayed by his side the whole time, reminding him gently and occasionally sarcastically of who he really was. He once tried to eat a Lasari ceremonial stone thinking it was candy. She told him that's definitely not something a galactic librarian would do. Maybe Bixby had a wild phase, but memory returned, sanity mostly intact, and once Florpheus had been escorted back to its own pocket timeline with apologies and a gift basket of glow fruit life on. The spire slowly settled, and something in Trevor had changed. It wasn't just that he now occasionally saw snippets of the past in reflections and unwanted side effect of the memory tentacle incident, or that he had learned to navigate a society built on empathy, logic, and unusually poetic tax codes. It was something deeper. He no longer felt like the nervous outsider, the underqualified tan tourist lost in a world of elegance and intellect. He felt like someone who belonged. Of course, it helped that Allure had more or less confirmed her interest in the long haul, or at least the medium to long haul. There were still discussions to be had, cultural customs to learn. For example, he had to complete something called the Festival of Shared Weirdness, a Lasari bonding ritual that involved jointly assembling a sculpture from objects that represented one's inner self. Iria brought a shard of glass from her home world, a broken navigation circuit, and a small fossilized sea shell that hummed when the light touched it. Trevor contributed a half-melted plastic dinosaur, the fork he accidentally bent at their first meal, and a photo of himself at age 10 with a colander on his head, pretending to be a space captain. She stared at his contributions for a long moment. This is either touching or alarming, she said finally. Little of both, Trevor replied, but it's me, and that, it seemed, was enough. The sculpture was a crooked, chaotic thing, but it pulsed faintly with shared energy. When they finished, it was, according to Uriah's people, the sign of potential, of resonance. The real turning point came a week later when the grand delegation from the outer confluence arrived for a diplomatic summit, expecting Uriah, as always, to play the cool, unapproachable mediator. Instead, they found her laughing at a human joke involving ducks, staring fondly at Trevor from across the room, and occasionally engaging in what could only be described as mild flirtation involving biothermal beverages. Diplomatic scandal. It was not shock, yes. Mild confusion, certainly, but most surprisingly, it worked. Her warmth disarmed them. Trevor's awkward sincerity won over 2 high-ranking confluence officials, who later admitted they hadn't laughed in over a decade together. The pair negotiated a cultural exchange agreement that would send artists, scientists, and somehow 3 ventriloquists across systems. The spire had never seen anything quite like it. In the following days, more messages arrived from across the stars. Congratulations, curiosity, even a few cautiously worded courtship withdrawals. It seemed the universe at large was adjusting to the idea that Allura, the famously elusive, the untouchable, the one who had rejected hundreds, had found something real, not through political strategy, not through genetic compatibility charts or ancestral bonding maps, but through choice, through laughter, through the messy, illogical miracle of affection. In a quiet moment aboard the Spire's upper terrace, Trevor and Uriah stood together, watching the cosmos shift above them. The stars glowed in their ever unreachable dance, and a passing cargo ship painted streaks of silver across The sky, you know, Trevor said. On Earth, when people look at the stars, they dream about finding something bigger than themselves. Tilted her head, ears twitching softly. And did you? He smiled, leaning against the railing. I found someone better. She looked at him for a long time, expression unreadable. Then reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small glowing orb. It flickered with an inner light and emitted a slow melodic hum. What is that? He asked. Elisari promised. Crystal, you give it to someone when you choose them. Trevor blinked. Wait, is this a proposal? Because I'm still wearing socks with tiny rocket ships on them. It's not a marriage contract, she said, placing it gently in his palm. It's a vow to continue to explore, to not run. When things get uncertain, he closed his fingers around it, feeling the pulse of warmth. I can do that, he said. I'm an expert in uncertain, I know. And then she kissed him softly. Without ceremony, without audience, just them on a quiet terrace beneath the indifferent stars. There would still be challenges ahead, long conversations, cultural translation errors, one particularly overzealous Lycery aunt who had already begun knitting them symbolic union garments. But Trevor wasn't worried. Because in the end, the alien woman who had rejected hundreds didn't need perfection. She needed someone who saw her, not the diplomat, not the symbol, but the person. And somehow, impossibly, that someone had been a slightly clumsy, deeply sincere human who believed love was worth looking foolish for. The stars above didn't blink, but if they could, they might have winked.